Namaste and welcome to the Bharat Varta podcast. I'm your host, Roshan Karyappa. Today we have a very special guest with us. Sandeep Balakrishna is a veteran writer, author, editor, speaker, and independent researcher with about 20 years of experience on Indian history, culture, literature, and temples. He's also founder and chief editor of the Dharma Dispatch, which is, and I quote, a unique online platform offering rare, valuable, original, and in depth content aimed at crafting and promoting a cultural narrative rooted in the Sanatana ethos. We're going to be talking to him about Indian history writing, its flaws, the impact it's had, and possible corrections that have to be made. Sandeep ji, namaste and welcome to the podcast.
Namaste, Roshanji. Glad to be on your podcast.
Yeah,
I
very
hope you're
excited to
doing
have
well.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
very much so. Thank you so much for asking. As a
Yeah.
long-time follower of yours, it's a pleasure to be able to talk to you. Sandeep ji, let's begin this discussion with an exploration into the landscape of how Indian history has been written, right?
Mm.
So there is this famous saying that Indian history is neither Indian nor history. So if you look at like history as ancient history, then medieval history, and then like the modern history, right? And again, I mean, we can define the periods
Mm.
as is, right? Let's look at modern history, for example. Let's say the last 500 or 600 years, right?
Mm. Mm.
Maybe the
Mm.
last thousand years with the of history, right?
Mm.
What do you see as the key flaws in which the history of these 1,000 years have been written,
Mm.
and how do you think it's different from the way we know it?
Okay, so that I think can be a good starting point because
Sure.
when you say 1,000 years of history,
Right.
that period itself can be further subdivided into
I'm
roughly,
sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
3 or 4 parts. The
Right.
1,000 years is kind of seminal because that was, pretty much when alien Muslim invasions began to occur into India, right? That is roughly around, if you count Muhammad bin Qasim's invasion,
Right.
he came into Sindh in 712 Common Era. And it went on, these invasions went on till the time of Ahmad Shah Abdali, who defeated the Marathas. So, roughly up to the mid or early 18th century.
Hmm.
So, that is roughly the time span you are looking at.
Right.
Now, there is a history of India. One thing that we have to bear in mind when we discuss Indian history is that it is a continuum.
Hmm.
When you use a word history, it always evokes an association with something that is dead and gone in the past. It is true, that is the reason we study the past. It is true, that is why history is a separate discipline. But in the case of India, this history is a continuum
Hmm.
because when you talk about Indian history, you cannot separate it from Indian civilization.
Right.
And of all the countries in the world, we are the only civilization, the only what you call non-Abrahamic civilization with an unbroken continuity.
Hmm.
Right? These the traditions that we still have today. It could be temples, it could be various festivals. The method of our Vedic recitation, for example, it has survived intact. Now, if you chant the Veda today, and you transport yourself back in time, about 7,000 years back,
Hmm.
and you chanted the same Vedas, the same lessons were being taught,
Right.
they would understand this, and you would understand them.
Right.
You got it? And various temple traditions, for example, that
Hmm.
knowledge base, the cultural civilizational knowledge base in various spheres of life
Hmm.
and society and other culture, they have been preserved in an unbroken fashion till now. So when you talk about Indian history, this civilizational continuum is something very unique only to India.
Interesting.
Right. So now, the word for history in India, in any Indian language, is itihasa, as you know it. Right.
Right.
So itihasa is a compound word. I mean, if you can split the word itihasa as iti plus ha plus asa. What its literal meaning is, it happened thus. Right. So meaning there is a sense of literalism in that.
Hmm.
In our tradition, our Ramayana and Mahabharata are considered as itihasa
Hmm.
for a reason, not in the sense of history that we understand today.
Hmm.
Now, the common conception of history, as we have learned it and as we understand it commonly, is that it is something that has happened in the past because it is a linear reconstruction of the past, a study and a reconstruction of the past, which means there is a past, there is a present, and there is a future.
Hmm.
So it proceeds in a straight line. In our concept, which means again it is related to time, right? So in our conception, when you say itihasa, time is taken as a cyclic,
Hmm.
right? So in a wheel, what goes up should come down again, right? It is constantly in a state of revolution, in a
Right.
state of rotation, right? So this is a fundamental concept with which Indian history, the conception of Indian history differs from what we know today and what we study today as history. Unless this is understood properly,
Hmm.
and kept in mind when studying Indian history in the sense that we understand it today, we will have a lot of confusions.
Right. Right.
So I guess we can begin with on that note.
Right. I want to, delve deeper into what you mentioned, right? Which is that,
Mhm.
from our perspective, from the
Mm,
dharmic perspective,
mm,
it's a continuum
mm,
and it is cyclical,
mm,
right? As against, let's say a conventional view of history, which is, things that happened in the
mm,
past. It's a very linear sort of a view of
mm,
history mapped to time,
mm,
right? Um, so, how does one with
mm,
this current modern framework of mind
mm,
grasp the cyclical nature of itihas, as you
mm,
mentioned, right? Because we are so used to seeing history as things that happened in the past, right?
mm, mm,
Whether it could be a history of the last week, last
mm,
year, or
mm,
let's say the last 500 years.
mm.
Uh, Help us understand the cyclical nature of itihas.
Okay, so the simplest way to understand this cyclical nature of Itihasa is to see some of the cultural facets that are visible all around us as we see.
Hmm.
Okay, one method in which people might call it unscientific or whatever, but this will give you a handle on understanding our own mindset, our own attitude and approach to these things. Okay, one way to understand this is a concept of yuga. You're familiar with the four yugas, right? What does each yuga mean? Okay, there is a fixed time for this yuga, and once that time ends, that yuga closes, which leads to another yuga, which leads to another yuga. So you have four main yugas.
Right.
After that, what happens? Time itself dissolves in a sense.
Collapses. Yeah.
It dissolves, it doesn't collapse. It dissolves, but it is because it is not static.
Hmm.
There is a regeneration and a rebirth.
Hmm.
So one end of the end of Kali Yuga is supposed to be very barbaric and very brutal.
Hmm.
At the end of which lots of floods will happen and the whole
Pralaya.
world will pralaya, all that thing will happen. It doesn't end at that. A new Krita Yuga will come in its place.
Okay.
Right? It is just like that. So if you keep this in mind, then we will be able to make a lot of sense of our epics, of our other sacred literature, and even worldly literature like poems and prose and drama and all these other things. Certain nuances are there in all these texts, which is directly linked to this concept of itihasa.
Right. Right. So let me ask that question. Let me frame it slightly differently, right? So, what would be the dharmic equivalent of what we know as history, conventional history?
So there is nothing like a dharmic equivalent. I mean, you can't use these adjectives just
Sure.
like that, right?
Right.
There's nothing like a dharmic equivalent. It is just that we regard history from a different perspective,
Right.
With a cyclical approach to time.
Right.
Whereas the current fashion of reading and understanding history is in a linear, where there is a clear division, like I said, past, present, and future.
Got it.
That's the only difference, basically.
Sure. Okay. And at some level, civilization, culture, or conventional history, or whatever you call it, all of these tend to merge and overlap at some level, right? and especially with regards to India, as you mentioned, we are the oldest living civilization in the world, right? How do you sort of is there a sort of a difference between all of these things, and how do you how does one think about these things?
Okay, so there's several different ways you can approach this. I'll give you one very brief kind of
Sure.
answer on this. Is that the fundamental difference between Sanatana Dharma and the West, or Abrahamic religion, is its attitudes towards creation and nature.
Hmm.
We regard all of creation, all of nature as sacred, like Sanatana Dharma, or if you want to extend it, juxtapose it on a larger canvas, what are known as sorry, what are known as pagan religions and pagan cultures. They regard all of creation with with an element of sanctity. For example, Greeks and Romans, those two were civilizations. They had a god or a goddess for almost every imaginable thing. Like, just like how we have goddess of learning Saraswati, the Greeks also had. Just like how we have a goddess of love, the Romans also had. Right. So there is a one-to-one correlation, and see, all these are all like a circle. Okay, when you talk about history, civilization, culture, traditions, and all that, they are all part of a circle. You can't say, uh, uh, where do I begin to explore the circle? It doesn't work like that. So you can the starting of any
Starting point
circle
could
is
be
a
anything.
point.
Right.
It is a point, right? So from the point you draw a circle.
Got it.
You take the compass, put it, put a point, and then you draw a circle, right? So which is that? So unless you have to see the circle as a whole, take any starting point, take anything. It could be literature, for example. It could be Ramayana. That itself opens up, an entire world, and bit by bit you start completing this circle. What has happened is the Western approach is a direct opposite of this. Is that they compartmentalize these things and look at them in isolation. So this is a big issue, and given how our education has progressed, it has only led to this confusion has only grown in popular culture and in other places as well.
Right.
So this is one way to understand this. One, A is the conception of time. B is the outlook towards entire creation itself. We regard all of creation. Why do we have, a stone is a stone, but why do you do puja to that, right? So this has a tradition, a history. Again, you get a history. You can trace back the history of this Murti Puja to, nearly 4,000 years.
Right.
So you see how the circle is getting completed slowly. So what emerged from Murti Puja? Right? Temples.
Rituals.
Temples, rituals, whatever. And what happened in temples? Temples were great centers of education, dance, music, learning. So you see, one more bit of circle got completed.
Got it.
All the way till Tyagaraja, for example. Tyagaraja could not have written his Kritis without this foundation.
Fantastic.
So in one place, Tyagaraja scolds Rama that, listen, we worship you as a god, but you're so arrogant. Hanuman, he meets you for the first time. You don't even have the courtesy to, say hello to him. Instead, you ask Lakshmana to speak on your behalf. What kind of a god are you? So it is so evocative, right? And as you all know, as we all know, Tyagaraja was a lifelong devotee of Rama. The fact that he can scold him, what does it show? And he couldn't have taken this liberty without this strong, thousands of years of foundation that gave him this.
Right.
So what did you get here? You got music, you got lyric, you got poetry, you got history, you got epics.
Right.
So this is, these things cannot be taught. Unfortunately, you cannot learn these things merely by reading. Lifestyle is a big contributor to this, and the deeper we get into this, the equipment will manifest itself inside you in ways that you can't even know. We
Right.
have to take that time out to do this. I don't know whether what I'm speaking now is relevant in this age and time or not, but
Right.
this is, if you want to understand, what you called as dharmic history or whatever, these are some of the hints that we can offer.
Sure. Sure. Um, See, just from listening to everything that you've said so far, right? I mean, the lens in which we view some of these things, our drishti is so different
Hmm.
compared to, conventional how it's written, right? So, what would your advice be for modern academics or modern writers who are looking to understand this thing? I mean, how
Hmm.
should they grasp this? Where is a good place to start? I mean, you mentioned that any place on the circle is good enough to draw that
Yeah, complete the
thing,
circle. Yeah,
complete the circle, right? I
yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
as you mentioned, I mean, I can either start from the Murti Puja
Hmm.
and go all the way down to Tyagaraja and everything, or I
Hmm.
could learn about Tyagaraja and then put the circle the other way
I,
also and come back.
either which way, yeah,
Either
yeah,
which way, but
yeah, either which way.
for
Totally.
a person living in this century, right, for the
Hmm.
person looking to grasp some of these things and write about them for
Hmm. Hmm.
a modern reader, right? Let's assume like
Hmm.
a 17-18 year old
Hmm.
person who wants to understand more. What
Hmm.
is a good way to go about doing this?
One thing is the cultural ambience at home and in your immediate surroundings.
Hmm.
Without that, it really can't happen. And the analogy I can give is that, uh, uh, if someone wants to, breed polar bear in Bangalore, is it possible?
Right.
That that cultural environment, that cultural climate is immediate surroundings is very important.
Right.
That plays a huge role.
Hmm.
See, what has happened is, at one time, not at one time, just 40, 50 years back, you could step out of your home and your culture, you would inhale it. It will be around you. You didn't need to learn because you would live it, right? What experience teaches you is far valuable, and it teaches you in a million invisible ways. What we are trying to do, and we continue to do, is to think that everything can be, learnt on our own. It doesn't work like that,
Hmm.
especially in this field. In this area, it doesn't work like that. Your immediate family, your friends or relative circle, your locality, your surroundings. So that is why one of the big prescribed methods for learning and acquiring knowledge, enlightenment, wisdom, and all that, unfailingly, all our ancient texts and preachers, whoever philosophers, was that they said satsanga,
Hmm.
the company, the constant company of good and wise people and learned people.
Community. Okay.
That is, see, that also your Gurukulam, traditional schools, what you call whatever Gurukulam. Gurukulam is also one form of satsang,
Hmm.
right? Where these informal exchanges
Hmm.
on a daily basis, it plays a big role in shaping your entire life, which includes learning. Could be history, it could be whatever learning.
Hmm.
This experience is what we have lost. That is one. And you cannot learn these things merely from books, although books are definitely important.
Hmm.
But it is largely a passive method of learning.
Hmm.
Right. Now, I'll take one example. Say this common, Sanskrit shloka, which you're familiar with, Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu.
Guru Vishnu.
So, you know the dictionary meaning of it.
Gurudeva Maheshwara.
Okay, so you know the dictionary meaning of it. But is that all? So, you would have as many teachers are there, that many number of, elaborate expansion on each word.
Hmm.
So this used to be the method, and this cannot, books cannot replace these real human beings
Hmm.
who would have had their own insights. Those insights are transmitted from generation after generation. Right? So when all these things come together, then you kind of get a proper perspective, a proper method, and a proper approach to learning our own history. And one suggested way that people can kind of learn Indian history, the correct Indian history, is to acquire an advanced knowledge in your mother tongue, any Indian language, any Indian language. Because if you are saying that you want to learn Indian history
Mm.
through books written in English, yes, you might. There are excellent Indian histories written in English,
Mm.
but you know who like great stalwarts like Jadunath Sarkar. They knew Sanskrit. He was a prolific scholar in Bengali as well. Jadunath Sarkar, people of his stature,
Mm.
right? So he would read primary sources, documents, court documents, temple inscriptions. Which language were they all written in? Either in Sanskrit or any Indian
Okay.
language. So if you want to understand, learn Indian history, you have to master at least one Indian language.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So you mentioned Jadunath Sarkar. Any other historians, any other writers that you would recommend to our listeners that they should definitely check out?
Yeah, I've made a book list on Dharma Dispatch.
Okay.
Okay, it is quite comprehensive. It contains more than about 100 books, I think, nearly,
Okay.
roughly around that, I think.
Right.
So just put a search for the Dharma Dispatch reading list or book list or something.
Sure.
And yeah,
We'll link it. We'll link it in
yeah,
our
just link that.
episode.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
And in your own experience of writing history, right? And we just spoke about the book that you have upcoming as well.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, in bringing this book to the masses and in bringing all of this rich content to the masses, what are some of the barriers for this? I have asked you multiple times for certain to understand certain things, right? My limitations, obviously, right? So now, assuming that the average audience or the average reader is some such person like me, how do you get your point across to this person, in a conventional form of communication?
There are two ways to do this, okay?
Right.
Some people, some authors have a specific audience in mind,
Hmm.
okay? But some authors, they purely write for, pleasure or, whatever they want to, just to get their message across. It doesn't matter which audience consumes it.
Hmm.
Okay, I belong to the latter category. I don't
Right.
have I don't have a specific audience in mind. So these things can't what you say. See, if I'm writing a history book, for example, a
Hmm.
history textbook, I know my exact audience. Is it for the pre-university? Is it for high school? Is it a research work? So it's very clear cut. But in a generic, broad-based kind of a work, the impetus sometimes has to come from within.
Hmm.
The motivation has to come from within, and the choice of subject again is left to the author's discretion or whatever, because there have been thousands of books on Shakespeare alone, for example.
Right.
Literally lakhs of books on Shakespeare alone. Was Shakespeare a feminist? Some philosophy in Shakespeare. How are women treated in Shakespeare's dramas? This kind of thing. So the
Right.
same subject, either you give a new perspective, or you give a new insight, or you give a new fact that has not been brought to light before. So these are some of the different things, and there is also the question of how to make it appealing. I assume that is where you're coming from.
Right. Exactly.
Appealing, or in a reader friendly, or what you call the common man, and that kind of
Consumable way. Yeah.
that kind of thing. Again, this whole notion of a common man or whatever it is that itself is arguable,
Hmm.
because I don't I mean, personally speaking, I don't think any reader of my book is uninformed or ignorant.
Hmm.
That is a very arrogant approach to have. So I want to say something. I'll say it in the manner I'm best equipped with, or in the language I'm that is most convenient for me.
Right.
So these are different things. It depends on the individual author. The
Right.
message has to get across. That's pretty much it.
Right.
There is
So,
no one rule or one formula.
right.
What I
Right.
will not do, what I will not do is that I won't dumb it down.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose that's fair. That's absolutely fair as well, right?
Yeah.
So,
Mm.
history is a subject that is taught in schools and colleges, and I mean, and we can obviously we can say it's poorly taught, but assuming that we can correct that, right? We can correct
Mm.
that narrative and so on and so forth, right?
Mm.
Short of doing some sort of a sadhana, short of being steeped in Sanskrit and being steeped in some kind of I don't know, rituals and stuff like that.
Mm.
uh, how must history be taught in schools and colleges, right? Where you're trying to really get to someone, affect them more than just for a narrow focus of, okay, doing some exams and getting some marks and whatnot, right? So
Mm.
how can that passion be cultivated within these schools and colleges?
Well, that depends on. See, you're asking this question only because, and this question has, come up in the first place
Hmm.
because history, instead of being a academic discipline, like mathematics or any other thing, like any pure discipline,
Hmm.
pure subject, it has become politicized.
Right.
This is the reason that you're the first place you're asking this question.
Hmm.
So, any subject, it is not just history, any subject has to be taught in a manner that is interesting, in a manner that develops love within the student of any age. And if this love is not developed at a very early age, which is when people are most receptive, between
Right.
the ages of 3 to about 22 or 23.
Right.
This is the only period you have your formative years. These 19 or 20 years, everything you learn, your whole worldview, everything is shaped, the seeds are sown in this.
Hmm.
Rest of it is, this is the fixed deposit that happens. After that, you keep cashing on that. Now
Hmm.
what you do with that interest that you get from the fixed deposit, whether you gamble or drink or uh, add more, create more wealth, is up to you. But these tendencies
Hmm.
and these seeds and this growth is occurs between this age, and at that age you have to develop what is known as education system has to inculcate a sense of love,
Hmm.
be it any subject. So even today, the subject that students hate universally is maths.
Right.
Why should it be? See, Bertrand Russell has written a beautiful essay on the proper way of teaching mathematics, and he mentions this, that
Hmm.
students, instead of scaring them, make them love it. So this is the same thing that has to be done with the teaching and learning of history as well.
Right.
So there is story in the spelling of history, right?
Hmm.
It should be a story, and
Right.
who doesn't love a good story, right?
Right.
So I mean, that's a different topic that it has been completely distorted in, unfortunately, in independent India,
Hmm.
and several generations, 4 or 5 generations, have been totally turned off, if not hated history, and on this kind of basis, what they've learned, they form their worldview about culture and what happened in the past and all that. So
Right.
it all boils down again to the same thing, circle.
Right.
Hmm.
Right. So, just picking up from where what you were talking about, right?
Hmm.
So, let's talk about some of the impact that this has had. I mean, not being able to understand our civilizational ethos, or
Hmm. Hmm.
our itihasa as it should be read and understood, right? What is some of the
Hmm.
modern implications of this? What do you see as some of the impact that has come about because of this?
Our history, starting roughly our education system, that is the history as a subject in our curriculum, starting roughly around the late 60s onwards up to now, has done one thing very spectacularly. It has made 3 generations of Indians hate India. This is what it is done. So a child goes to school. This is what Swami Vivekananda said. A child goes to school, and the first thing he learns, rather, the first thing he's taught, is that his father is a fool, his mother is superstitious, got it, and his
Right.
grandfather is a lunatic. Right? So, uh, this is what has done. I mean, when you grow up hating your own country, your own textbooks teach you this.
Mm.
The first opportunity, available opportunity, you get to migrate out.
Mm.
Okay, you will get out. What will you do if you go? If you get out, for the longest time, US was the favored country of choice. So what do you do when you go to US? You will abuse your own country. Which country does this?
Mm.
This happens only through your history textbooks, primarily. And if you don't have an opportunity to migrate, and you join, civil services, or you become a judge or something, you will give the judgment like what happened in Shabrimala. Where do you get all these from? From what you have learned in school and college.
And how do you see this changing?
I don't know. I mean, I can't predict the future. But this has to, if change has to happen, in a positive kind of a direction, the government should get out of writing history textbooks.
Mm.
Yeah.
And when you say a government has to get out of writing history textbooks, any other prescriptions on that? I mean, in terms of how we can, in your words, right? So in terms of how we can control or sort of recapture this narrative as such?
See, education in India has always been funded, run, managed by communities in India. You can read Dharampal's Beautiful Tree on, it was brilliant system that only, the highest levels of genius could think of this. The state had no direct control in education. It was all funded by, temples, by communities of, businessmen, traders, merchant guilds. These guys used to fund it.
Mm.
And the teachers, first of all, the role of teachers today, teaching is one of the most the professions which is considered derogatory. So look at the downfall. When I spoke about Guru Brahma, from there to what they have come down. Right. So the role of teachers was very central in our culture for the longest time. So these were community funded, and teachers were real teachers in the sense that they were specialists. And one unfortunate fallout of what is known as universal literacy, universal education, and all that. One fallout has been the destruction of what is known as oral traditions, oral cultures, which preserve this culture and civilization in ways that we can't even understand. All of that is gone.
Right.
95% of this that is gone.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example which a great scholar told me. So, as what is known as this informal kind of knowledge, okay, which was preserved from generation to generation, is that one evening, okay, there is a canal kind of a thing in some village, and it is dry. And people are worried that the monsoon won't come this year. And then one lady, she looks down on the ground and she sees a group of some insects walking slowly. Then she looks up and she says, "Don't worry. Around the same time tomorrow, monsoon will start in full flow." So they ask her, how do you know this? She says, "These insects, they come exactly one day before monsoon." So which books will teach you this? So, see, it is not that, I want to recreate that pastime or whatever, but preserve and, perpetuate what is good, right? What is good from the past. You have to preserve it, right? Otherwise, what's the point? So communities, coming back to that, communities preserved this, I mean, they maintained education in this fashion. And, when you say universal literacy, what do you mean? Just knowing how to sign your name, or, giving out, multiplication tables? You don't need to go to school for that.
Mm.
Right? So, education, these things are specialist areas. Now, what is the matter? Why should everybody know how to read and write? I'm telling you this
Mm.
in all seriousness. Not everybody is equipped with the same kind of mental faculty. Okay, I highly recommend that you read a very good. I think it's available on YouTube also. It is called Status Anxiety.
Okay.
I think it's a 3 or 4 part documentary by Alain D. Botton, one of the brilliant minds in the contemporary time. Okay, that and the pleasures and sorrows of work. These 2 books you read. Okay, there he mentions exactly this, that when you say, everything should be accessible to everyone, and that anybody can do anything. I cannot be a rocket scientist.
Mm.
You cannot be the Prime Minister of India. Face it, that is a reality. You can go give it a shot. You can't be the PM of India. So there are certain what you known as basic human limitation. So all these had certain structures which you couldn't explain, but they functioned beautifully when they all came together like a fine assembly plant in one beautiful automobile factory or something. All these were all invisible components. And
Sure.
in the name of, I don't know, God knows what kind of policies, they've ruined all these things. They
Right.
were functioning beautifully before these interventions happened. Anyway, I digressed a
Right.
lot.
No, that was an interesting point in terms of knowledge and education being sort of very bottoms up, very grounds up in a way, right? I mean, as against how it is at this point of time, which is a very top down sort of a structure. We're being taught about things that we may not necessarily have to care about, right? In some
Exactly.
sense.
Yeah.
Right, versus things which would have been a little more important to us maybe 50, 60 years back as well, right? Often,
Absolutely.
when I go back to my native, I know the people there instantly know when it's going to rain, or
Yeah.
things to
Yeah.
that effect, right?
Yeah.
So which don't matter to us in the concrete sort of a jungle that we live in, but
Yeah.
it could be the matter of life and death sometime back, or even now, if
Yeah.
you were to shift to those
Yeah.
places and
Rules.
environments.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I also want to talk about this oral traditions, right? And I have sort of read some of these perspectives in terms of why the oral tradition was superior and so on, right? Can you elaborate a little more on that? I mean, on these oral traditions specifically, and the focus on those oral traditions?
Okay, when you say oral traditions, it is a wide kind of subject again. Now we'll stick to just 2 or 3 areas. One obviously is the learning of teaching and learning of Vedas
Right.
and Sanskrit literature and other things. Now, read this fine book called Ancient Indian Education or Education in India by Radha Kumar Mukherjee. Okay, so there and other essays on education by Ananda Kumaraswamy. Okay, these things will equip you and give you an insight that you are like, you read one sentence, and I read it long back, so you're just you. I mean, the book falls down from your hand, and you're just you don't know what to think. So this is one thing. Okay, so a traditional Indian education, it could be in any language. Okay, a traditional education, by the time the child is about 14 years or 15 years old, he has a vocabulary of 80,000 words,
Wow.
all stored here on the tip of the tongue. This is oral tradition. And how is this vocabulary developed? Imagine having 80,000 words at your command. Words are, every word is an idea, right? It stands for something. Now, something itself is an idea. The word something itself is an idea because you can't express what that something is, so you say something.
Mm.
So, imagine the range of subjects that this vocabulary will cover. So, this is the strength of oral tradition. One. And two is that oral tradition, in a different way, acts as a custodian uh, and a great reserve bank of culture. Now, I don't know if you might be familiar with all these dasayas and all that. I don't know if you know them. They were
Not
wandering
particularly.
monks. Yeah,
Yeah.
they are gone now, basically. They are on the verge of extinction. So they were basically wandering monks who would sing various kritis and devarnamas and all that, right? In the countryside, everywhere. With just one bag, and if people wanted, they would give food or rice or whatever. Okay. These people never wrote anything. Some
Mm.
people were not even, they didn't even, they were illiterate. But they knew all the rules of poetry. They knew some of them even knew the intricacies of language. They had thousands of compositions in their head.
Mm.
This they did throughout their life. They didn't do anything else. Now imagine the expertise that which gives you.
Mm.
How does it come? This is oral tradition. Then there is a branch of these dasayas who would remember, who would go from village to village, and who would remember the ancestry of important people in that village, going back to 6, 7 generations. So after 3 months, this guy will come to the same village, this wandering singer. He will come to the same village. He'll go to the Gauda of the village, the headman of the village, and he would say, how are you? Good, good, have some buttermilk. Okay, then, okay, he'll have the buttermilk and he'll start that, your great grandfather's name was this, you are this, your father is this, your father did this, he owned so many cows, he had so many acres of land, okay, his birthday was this. And he would go on reciting this for 6 generations, 6 previous generations.
Wow.
How would this guy know it? Because his previous 6 generations followed the same tradition, the same oral tradition. So look at the bond that is formed. And they
Mm.
would go from, this was not restricted to just 1 or 2 villages.
Mm.
One of these typical Jogayas, Dasayas, people who narrate family lineages, okay, they would have hundreds of names, lineages in their mind. They never wrote down these things. It would come like this.
Right. So that's a fantastic note to end the podcast on, Sandeep ji. This has been an enlightening.
The other thing about oral traditions is
Right.
rather history or itihasa is Thala Purana.
Mm.
Now go to any of these ancient or medieval temples, anything that has a history of more than 300 years.
Mm.
Okay, I'm just taking roughly. And most people might just pray there, take Mangalarti, give some offering and go. Ask the Pujari, the Purohita, the Sthala Purana, ask him to narrate the Sthala Purana. You will be shocked at what you will learn.
Mm.
Okay. So they know the exact dates and times when it was built, who built it, what were the provisions made for the maintenance of the temple, on what occasion, for what reason this temple was built. Why is this not called history?
Mm.
That's what I'm saying. You can take out only, you can gain only so much by reading books. No book will tell you this. Unfortunately, it has to tell.
Mm.
No history book will tell you this. Because history is primarily about details. It is not about the big picture. It is the details that make the big picture.
Mm.
It is the millions of cells in your body that give you this human form, and you can talk to me, I can talk to you.
Right.
Right. Thank you.
And yeah, so yeah, again, sorry, just a small deviation to that, right? And I think we call it a matter of convenience that certain things have been left out and certain things have been magnified in proportion and so on and so forth. But you make a very important point, which is, in context, everything that has happened is history, right? And that grounds up or the bottoms up sort of an approach where communities and localities know what happened 6 generations ago to them, and those things have significance, but unfortunately have been left behind, right?
Yes.
So all right, my final question to you, at the end of this very enlightening, fascinating conversation, right? And I've certainly learned plenty of things. In fact, I will look at things very differently post this, right? My final question is, why should an average person, why should a common person learn about these things, beyond just an intellectual pursuit, beyond understanding it from an intellectual realm, right? What is the significance of learning all of these things? What would you say to that?
What is the significance of eating and sleeping?
Right.
Your survival.
Yeah.
If you don't have a past, you don't have a future.
Right. Fantastic. So that's a very profound note to end the podcast on. Thank you so much, Sandeep ji. Really appreciate your time, and look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thank you. My pleasure. It was great talking to you.
Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you for tuning in. This podcast was brought to you by the team at Bharat Varta. If you liked this podcast, then don't forget to share, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite platforms. We're available on Anchor, Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, Breaker, YouTube, and a host of other platforms. We started Bharat Varta to facilitate long-form discussions on politics, policy, and culture. We don't necessarily endorse anything that was said in this episode. If you do wish to offer us any feedback on the content or anything else, do reach out to us on social media or get in touch with us on our website, www.bharatvarta.in. The links are in the description below. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.